A very good morning to all my dear students of class 10. This is the first class of the week. Today I will teach you the fifth chapter from your supplementary English book by NCERT, Footprints Without Feet. And the name of the chapter is Footprints Without Feet by H.G. Wells. H.G. Wells was a prolific English writer who was born in 1866 and he dies in 1946. So he mastered in writing both fictions and non-fictions. Today, we will get to know about Griffin, a scientist, who somehow discovers how to make himself invisible. And he wants to escape London because he had already committed a lot of crimes there. He wants to go to the remote part of the country where nobody will identify him. So he goes there, stays in an inn, and again he commits another crime, that is bank robbery, and he will constantly malutilize his power of becoming invisible. He is an eccentric scientist who malutilizes his own invention, his own discovery for serving his own purpose. Okay. So we will get to know about another character who is Mrs. Hall, who is the owner of the inn where Griffin will stay, and another person whose name is Mr. Jaffers, who is a dutiful police officer. So we will start from the chapter, from the beginning of the chapter. We will know how he commits crimes one after another and how he manages to do all these things and how he escapes and what are the problems, how the people are becoming very much surprised that how can a man be invisible. Okay, so I'm starting the chapter. The two boys started in surprise at the fresh muddy imprints of a pair of bare feet. What was a barefooted man doing on the steps of a house in the middle of London? And where was the man? As they gazed, a remarkable sight met their eyes. A fresh footmark appeared from nowhere. Further footprints followed, one after another, descending the steps and progressing down the street. The boys followed, fascinated, until the muddy impressions became fainter and fainter and at last disappeared altogether. The explanation of the mystery was really simple enough. The bewildered boys had following a scientist who had just discovered how to make the human body transparent. So two boys who are very much surprised to see there are only footprints. Okay, so they are following the impression of those footprints in the stairs. They followed it until it became faint. But finally they could not discover anybody there. So this is the result of a scientist's discovery who very much recently discovered how to become invisible. Okay. Griffin, the scientist, had carried out experiment after experiment to prove that human body could become invisible. Finally, he swallowed certain rare drugs and his body became as transparent as sheet of glass, though it also remained as solid as glass. Brilliant scientist though he was, Griffin was further a lawless person. So you just underline this word. He was a brilliant scientist, but he was a lawless man. He was not a lawful man. He was a lawless man. Though he was a brilliant scientist, but he was a lawless man. He used scientific experiments for his own benefits. He malutilizes them. Okay. So he did experiments after experiments in order to discover the way to become invisible. Finally, he discovers, but for his own benefit. Brilliant scientist though he was, Griffin was rather a lawless person. His landlord disliked him and tried to eject him. In revenge, Griffin set fire to the house. What a dangerous man. As his landlord was not ready to keep him in that house, he just put the house on fire. To get away without being seen, he had to remove his clothes. Thus it was that he became a homeless wanderer, without clothes, without money, and quite invisible, until he happened to step in some mud and left footprints as he walked. So, this is the reason why he was without money. So, as a homeless wanderer without clothes, without money, he was roaming here and there, leaving footprints, which we have found here. He escaped easily enough from the boys who followed his footprints in London. But these adventures were by no means over. He had chosen a bad time of the year to wander about London without clothes. It was midwinter. So, all of us know in London, winter is very, very, very cold, and he had to become a homeless wanderer without clothes because he had set the house where he used to live on fire as a revenge to the landlord, to the landowner, to the owner of the house. He was without clothes. Now, what to do? He somehow escaped from those two chasers, those two boys who almost found him by following the footprints that he made because he walked on the muds. So it was mid-winter and he did not have enough clothes with him. The air was bitterly cold and he could not go without clothes. Instead of walking about the streets, he decided to sleep into a big London store for warmth. Closing time arrived, and as soon as the doors were shut, Griffin was able to give himself the pleasure of clothing and feeding himself without regard to expense. So, closing time arrived. And as soon as the doors were shut, Griffin was able to give himself the pleasure of clothing and feeding himself without regard to expense. So, you can understand his intentions. So, without expense, he wants good clothing in order to cope up with the winter, and food, but without expense. He broke open boxes and wrappers and fitted himself out with warm clothes. Soon, with shoes, an overcoat, and a wide brimmed hat, he became a fully dressed and visible person. In the kitchen of the restaurant, he found cold meat and coffee, and he followed up the meal with sweets and wine taken from the grocery store. Finally, he settled down to sleep on a pile of quilts. So, all these things that will give him a comfortable time in the time of winter. He took all the meat, he just broke the boxes, had some good dress, hat, everything, so that he can cope up with the winter outside. And now he wants to have food, so he just goes to the restaurant and he just takes advantage of his being invisible and took the cold meat, wine, and everything. Now he wants to take rest in the quilt. If only Griffin had managed to wake up in good time, all might have been well. As it was, he did not wake up until the assistants were already arriving next morning. When he saw a couple of them approaching, he panicked and began to run. They naturally gave chase. In the end, he was able to escape only by quickly taking off his newly found clothes. So, once more, he found himself invisible but naked in the chill January air. So, everything would have been all right if he would have woke up before the arrival of the people that were there in the shops. The people, before the arrival of the people who used to work there. But he was sleeping. He was found by those men and they also chased him. Griffin managed to escape that place, but somehow he just took off all the clothes and again became completely invisible. And that is how he just managed not to be caught by the people. But again he has lost all the clothes and he became invisible. He took off all the clothes, but in that January chilly air, he was feeling very. So, up to this today, and in the next class, I will teach you the next part of the story. Okay, so you just read this story again and again in order to answer all the questions that will be framed from this chapter. So read the chapter. It's an interesting story. So here I have to end today. See you tomorrow.